Good afternoon and welcome to VetNet, IVMF Webinars channel. My name is Elvis Avdic and today our VetNet is on business to business sales. We have with us John Rosso and before I pass the mic to John, let me just remind you that we have upcoming next Thursday, June 27th, we have another webinar of VetNet and we're going to be hosting American Corporate Partners and they're going to talk to us about their new mentoring program for military spouses. And like I said, my name is Elvis Avdic. I'm Postbank Support Service Advisor here at IVMF, helping IVMF alumni with resources and support as they build and grow their businesses and careers. Now I'm going to pass the mic to John to give a little bit more about himself and kick off the presentation. John?
Great. Well, thank you, Elvis, and I'm grateful that you have me here this morning. I'm actually going to share my screen here with my background, maybe just to double check. Can you see feature presenter? Elvis?
Yes, we do, John.
Okay, great, got it. Okay, so just kind of cutting two things. Today's conversation will be 10 lessons learned that I've learned over the last 7 years, owning my own business as a former active duty Army officer. I've been prior to starting my own business, I basically have done a lot on the marketing side of business to business, where I've been a 3-time global chief marketing officer. I've been through some sales training. Most recently, I went through the Sandler IVMF program, which has been terrific. And I've also attended Dale Carnegie's sales training as well. And probably more importantly, my tie to Syracuse has really been through the EBV program. I've been a donor, both financially as well as time-wise. I present on a regular basis at St. Joseph's, which is a terrific program. I'm also a graduate of the EBVA program at FSU. And my undergraduate is at UConn, so I've got obviously some ties there. A little bit about ourselves before I jump into kind of the 10 lessons learned here. We're really helping other companies and other marketing and sales leaders optimize their new revenue, specifically around business processes and technology to maximize their impact. We've been doing this for about 7+ years. We've got 15+ years experience. We're global in nature. And probably the most relevant thing that I often wonder how to position my veteran service to those that are not veterans, I basically say that we deliver on the promise. Okay, so today what I'm hoping to do is leave you with 10 lessons learned. And if you could just remember and apply one of the 10 lessons, I think you're going to be in terrific shape. And first, what I thought I'd do is start off with a video. This video talks a little bit about mindset and also the definition of sales, because a lot of times when people think of sales, they don't necessarily have a positive connotation. But let's take a listen to Mark Hunter, who's an expert in this area as well.
Mark Hunter, the Sales Hunter. You know, one of the things that I always talk about, and it's Monday morning, so let's talk about it right now. But you know, my goal in sales is to help others see and achieve things they didn't think were possible. Write that down. Your goal is to help people see and achieve things they didn't think were possible. You know, that is that's mind-blowing when you take a step back and think about that. But that's what your goal is. Helping your customers, helping others. You know, in fact, I want you to think about it not just as your customers, but I want you to think about it, people in the office, people you come in contact with, your family, wherever it might be. Because you know what? Sales leaders live it 24/7. And their goal is to, hey, how do you help others see and achieve things they didn't think were possible? That's how we all become far more successful. Make this the week that you help somebody. And you know what? Along the way, you're going to allow yourself to see and achieve things that you didn't think were possible. Mark Hunter, the Sales Hunter. Great selling.
So that's just one example, but I think what I take away, not just about the definition of sales, but really it's a mindset and a mentality. And I find if you have the right mindset, just like anything in life, you can achieve far more than if you don't have the right mindset. So let's jump right into the lessons, and you'll see the structure here. I've got kind of a sales process before, during, and after in the upper right corner. And then I'm going to go through each lesson. The first lesson is really to play to our strengths as veterans. It's sometimes challenging to apply what we've done in the service to what it means in the commercial world, but we actually have several advantages. So what I did was I listed kind of what I see as traits that are really admirable traits in a selling environment and what this translates to. So probably the biggest thing is trust. If I look at my selling situation right now, trust is at an all-time low. It doesn't necessarily mean that people don't trust me as a person. It just means that if you look in any interaction, a lot of people are not necessarily trusting of salespeople. They've either been burnt or perhaps they've been overpromised to. It may not have a positive connotation as a profession, but from a veteran perspective, what trust means to us is something very, very deep. So, it goes back to my tagline of we deliver on the promise. Our word is our bond. And we know that we have to somehow translate that into a civilian selling situation. We're super disciplined. We're going to show up no matter what the obstacle is. We're persistent. We're honorable. I sometimes use the words, what is a fair outcome for all when we're negotiating? And we're resilient. We typically plan for contingencies where a lot of our civilian counterparts don't necessarily do that. So as I give this presentation, I actually give it to St. Joe's as well. And I typically ask in the room, what's the one thing that we have in common across all branches of the military? Navy, Marines, Air Force, Army. If you could pick out one thing, what would that one thing be? And I hear a variety of different things, but surprisingly, no one ever mentions this one aspect, and that is training. We've all been through training, basic training, officer training, jumping out of planes training, nuclear, biological, chemical training. It doesn't matter what training program that you've been through, but as veterans, we've all been through some sort of training. So let's apply that to the commercial world. Why would you be involved in a selling environment if you've not done some sort of training? Now, I wish I had learned this lesson far earlier in my 7-year trajectory of my business. Had I learned this from day one, I may have had more success, quite frankly, in ramping up at a quicker pace. There's a couple different training mechanisms here that I mentioned. I've been through Dale Carnegie. I actually spent money out of pocket to go through. I went through the Sandler Foundation's 8-week training. You can certainly purchase that, or you can go through IVMF to get it as well. And then I've got also another resource here, Anthony Ionero, who's really a student of the sales game. On the training side, you can go really, really deep. And it's very difficult for me to say in 10 lessons or less, you're going to walk away with a hugely changing, game-changing sales approach without actually going through the training process. The training process covers all of these areas: qualification, question, objections, buying committees, and what kind of outreach cadences, among other areas. Highly recommend that you do some sort of training. Another thing that we're used to is the word standard operating procedure. Well, in the service, when we had those, there was a reason for that. And it was really for consistency. So you'd have a consistent experience. This is no different than what you do in a selling environment. You have a set approach on how to sell from start to finish. The way Sandler approached it in our training was they actually used a submarine, which is kind of ironic because we were talking about military, and they compartmentalized it across 7 different stages, digging deep into each one. And what benefit this has is then you have some sort of consistency, it's replicable, it scales. For me, what I find helpful is I also try to visualize on what the successful outcome is. It's not necessarily negotiating a contract, it's helping, as Mark Hunter said, helping that client get to whatever destination that they need to get to. You're going to have to develop your own sales system of standard operating procedure. I'm going to reference this again at the end. I read a really good book by a Navy SEAL, and as an Army guy, I cringe when I say that for a couple reasons. One, he's in the Navy, and with all the education that I have, I was really frustrated when I picked up this book that I wasn't growing faster. And the book was by Brandon Webb, Total Focus. If you haven't read about it, Brandon is the guy that trained Chris Kyle, the American Sniper. And what I learned from his book is, particularly as it relates to special operations communities, they're very, very adept at testing, learning, iterating. They like to fail fast. And Brandon walks through a story of how he went through this trajectory. And a lesson learned is you got to keep testing. There's no silver bullet for sales. It's always testing, changing, iterating. It's a process as part of it. Brandon scaled his business to over $100 million in revenue. Now, mind you, he came out of the SEAL team, so he didn't have a lot of commercial experience other than when he first started his business, he failed miserably, but he learned from it and he iterated and then built a new business out of it. That book was very, very valuable in the process. I try to establish credibility through stories, which is something that you may want to consider too in your selling process. In this case, we focus on four vertical markets: tech, financial services, healthcare, and education. And when I'm getting into a selling situation, I'll often say, you know what? Your situation reminds me of Toby at Thomson Reuters. And here was a situation that Toby faced. He was looking to get marketing impact and he didn't know which direction to turn to. He turned to us and we were able to get him, for the first time in the history of the company, measurable results that marketing was driving top-line revenue, and they were credible. And what that enabled him to do was it enabled him to extend his tenure an additional year at the company. So I try to often weave in subtly some of our stories with our clients when I find a similar situation in a prospecting situation. You two are going to have to figure out what your stories are. Now, depending on where you are in terms of your business, you may be in a situation where you're just starting out and you may not have stories, in which case, what I'd suggest is you try to create the stories by really over-servicing those first couple of clients so you've got referenceable ones to potentially build on down the road. The other thing that I do with the stories is I try to quantify the exact impact. So here you see an example of an actual slide that I use in my presentation where I'm quantifying what exactly our engagements have delivered in terms of output. They've either saved time or made money. You too will have to think through what are your quantifiable achievements that you've done with other clients. And when you're able to do this, it becomes very tangible and very real, and it helps build that trust factor that we were talking about earlier. Lesson 6, and we're still in the during of the process here. And there's actually two different approaches here from Dale Carnegie and then from Sandler Sales Group as well. This is actually a picture of me at the Pentagon fielding questions as an example. But basically, the better questions that you ask of a client, the more you get them to think, the more you get them to say, wow, that's a really good question. I never really thought about it. You're building that trust, you're enlightening them, and you're engaging, versus someone who doesn't do that and it becomes more transactional. So selling is an emotional process, and you're trying to get people to engage and be emotional about it. The ratio of 2 ears to 1 mouth is really one of just trying to listen. Ask good questions, but really try to listen to what your prospect or client is trying to say. Now, the Dale Carnegie method of this was kind of one of taking a non-confrontational approach where they would talk about the current state, the future state, and they'd ask questions around what it would enable you to do personally and professionally. That's one methodology. The other methodology, which I have in the lower right-hand corner, is a more structured set of questions that was represented by Sandler during our training about talking about a very specific order called a pain funnel. And while you could use either model, and I've begun testing the pain funnel, what I really like about the pain funnel is it's more direct. It gets to the real problems and it gets people to open up from a selling viewpoint, because a lot of times when you're selling, people are not necessarily open to sharing. So by asking some of these questions, you're probing at the sharing aspects. Now, we all have blind spots. And, some of these blind spots might be specific to me, but I thought it would be helpful to kind of represent what I've seen in terms of my experiences as blind spots. The first side is the commitment language. As veterans, when somebody says show up at 0700, you're showing up 15 minutes early. Somebody says be on the parade field at a certain time, you're doing that. If somebody says we're departing the an area of marshaling all the equipment at a certain time, you're doing that and you're making sure that it's on time. That's a very different level of commitment than that of civilian language. Oftentimes I'll hear the words, I am the decision maker. Well, turns out that there's really other people that are involved in the selling process, not just this person. Or the proverbial, yeah, don't worry, I'll be back in touch. I'll call you in a couple of weeks. What I'm looking for is engagement. I'm looking for the interaction. I'm giving people the opportunity to engage with me. I'm not listening at face value to what they say. I'm looking for what they do. This has been a painful lesson over the years to really learn. The situation with buyers is they often do what's called ghosting. It's way easier for a buyer to just simply disappear, not respond to your emails, not respond to your voicemails, and just basically disappear. This is where talking through the pain funnel and really understanding how painful a situation is can be helpful from a selling perspective. Then the other blind spot, which I realized, is empathy develops trust. And I feel like as veterans, we grew up on not necessarily being empathetic. It was always people first, mission always, or something to that effect. Mission first, people always, I think was the terminology. And it always felt like the people side of the service was kind of lacking, at least in my experience. And let me show you what an example of this looks like from a commercial viewpoint. It's very, very different than probably what we experience in the service. So the lesson learned in all of this really is, from a selling viewpoint, the more you can meet people as to where they're at, and the more you can focus on them. It's not about you, it's about them. The more successful you will be in your selling environment. You'll be able to connect with the person, you'll be able to effectively overcome objections. And I feel like as a veteran, this was a trait that was not necessarily developed in us. Lesson number 9, proactively remove barriers so client can say yes. I try to think of ways that I can make it really easy for our clients to buy. Doesn't necessarily mean to be the lowest price, but think about how easy it is to buy something on Amazon these days. If I click on, excuse me, I've got some allergies here. If I click on something with Amazon, within a day, I have it delivered to my doorstep. You have to be just as easy for a company to do business with as Amazon is today with you. Here are some examples that I've used to help frame why it's easy to do business and why somebody ought to do business with you. And then the hardest lesson is you don't always succeed in sales. In fact, probably 9 times out of 10, you're not going to succeed. What I try to do is I try to go back, figure out what went well, what didn't go well, and what I could do better next time. This means going back to the buyer in lost opportunities and really listen and learn to why it is that they said no to you. You don't defend, you don't sell, you just learn. So the next time around, you can iterate and get better and repeat. So leaving this presentation, my one goal was really to get you to think differently about one aspect within the selling process, and hopefully somewhere in these 10 lessons that you were able to pick that up today. I've left my contact information here that you can reach out. You can connect to me on LinkedIn, drop me an email. I've got some free information about my selling process and about the tools that I use, and then some other valuable resources that I've joined. This group that Brandon Webb recommended called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. I'm part of the Accelerator group. They also have a nationwide entrepreneur organization for larger size companies. If you've already been through the EBV program, the advanced EBV program, and then because I've done this at St. Joseph's, they also have certificate-based programs as well. So with that, Elvis, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for participating. If you guys have any questions for John, please type them into your YouTube chat box and we'll make sure John answers it. So we'll give it a few seconds to see if anybody has any questions.
Sure.
If not, thank you so much. This webinar is being recorded and we will send a short survey out after the webinar, probably around 1 p.m. and with the recorded link as well. So and anybody that has registered for this event will see a recorded link as well. We just have thank you, John's, and YouTube channel.
Absolutely. We're still recording here?
Yes, we're still recording.
Got
I can edit this, later on. But... Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching out there, and we'll see you next Thursday as we host American Corporate Partners and as they discuss their new mentoring program for spouses. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elvis.